This is a picture of Mandy and her brother Danny. He's 2 years older than her. I can't remember how old they were probably in that picture. She looks like she's probably about 3 and he might be 5. And they were so close together. He took such, even as a little boy, he would hold her hand coming down the hill. And it's a rocky hill, but he'd hold her hand. And when they would go into school together, when she was in the developmental preschool and he was at Maynardville Elementary, I just watched him take hold of her hand and walk her into the school. And it was so precious. And here's a picture of Mandy when she was probably about 4. She was walking at that time. She was a talker. She talked and talked. Always had opinions. All right, Seth asked me if I'd like to talk about my daughter Mandy, who passed away on January 5th this year. And I think I'm ready to talk about her now. I miss her a lot, but she has a pretty long story to be told about. Mandy is my second child, actually my third. My first one was a miscarriage. And then Danny came along when we were married 7 years. And 2 years after that, I got pregnant with Mandy. And when I was 20 weeks along, which is halfway through your pregnancy, they did an ultrasound. And, well, first they did a blood test and said that the blood test came back that the AFP was abnormal for spina bifida, which I didn't know very much about spina bifida at all at the time. And they said, don't worry about it, it's probably fine. Well, when I had my 20-week ultrasound, the perinatologist at the time, he looked at it and he said, yes, he said, it does look like she has spina bifida. Well, he didn't know at the time if it was a boy or a girl. And he said that it was at the top of her spine and that it was at T12. And at the time, we still didn't know much about it. At that time, he did say he noticed that she looked like a girl. And he did an amniocentesis. And that did determine that, yes, we were having a little girl. And I had always known that when I had a little girl, I was going to name her Mandy because I'm a big Barry Manilow fan. So when I was about even 12 years old, I already knew if I had a little girl, she was going to be Mandy. So I stopped at work that day. It happened to be me and Tom's 9th anniversary when this happened. And I came to him crying and I said, it's our little Mandy. I said, she has spina bifida. And one of the things that happened whenever I talked to the doctor there, he showed us a video about spina bifida, and it was pretty depressing. And I've always been against abortion, and, you know, my whole family. And my mom had been the one who went with me. We were always very close, and she said, if you decide you want an abortion, she said, I will support you, even though we didn't believe in it. I said, no, Mom, I can't do it. And I said, we're praying to God and we'll deal with whatever happens. And we needed to go see a neurosurgeon to talk about Mandy. This neurosurgeon, a pediatric neurosurgeon that we went to, Tom and I went to talk to him, and he pretty much said that our lives are going to be a living hell. He said, marriages don't survive this. He said, she won't be able to walk or talk, and he just painted a very grim history of what could happen. And he said, it's not too late to get an abortion. And I said, no, that's not an option for us. I said, we have a strong family unit, and I have a lot of people supporting me. And so that was our decision. And then I found out I had to start seeing a perinatologist at UT. And he was a wonderful perinatologist. He took the ultrasound and looked at Mandy, and by this time I could feel Mandy moving around. And he said, no, he said, this opening is not at T12. He said, it's down around the sacral region, about S2 or 3. He said, look at her legs move. And so, of course, we were quite happy about that. And Mom and I just loved the perinatologist. She would bake cinnamon rolls every time we'd go to see him and give him cinnamon rolls. So whenever I had Mandy, she only came a week early. But we started off, because my water broke, we started off to the hospital. And when we got into Maynardville, we had to pull over at the ambulance because the contractions were coming 4 minutes apart. So they took me there. And I knew I had to have a C-section because it's safer for the baby if you have a C-section. So it took forever for my doctor to get there, and he finally got there, and they did the C-section. And Mandy was 8 pounds. Do you remember how many ounces? 8 pounds, 7 ounces, I think. She was a big baby. My son, Danny, was only 4 pounds, 9.5, and that was hard having him naturally. So I was kind of glad I had her by C-section. So she stayed in the nursery there, for about, in the NICU. She stayed there for only about 2 weeks, and she got to come home. She was the biggest baby in the NICU because, there's so many preemies there. And we brought her home, and before she came home, of course, the first surgery that she had to be closing the hole with her spine, and they closed that up. And they kept measuring, the neurosurgeon kept measuring her head to see if the head was increasing, to see if she had hydrocephalus, which most children with spina bifida do. And on day 6, it did measure high enough, and so they put a shunt through her brain to drain the fluid. And then we got to bring her home, and she progressed during her babyhood and all that. She progressed really well. She, of course, sat up a little bit longer than babies do. She crawled a little bit later than babies do. She went to, I think she started crawling when she was a year old, and she was going to physical therapy. And she got DAFOs, which are braces that they put on your legs, and she ended up walking with those braces. And she could book it with those braces on. She could just almost run. And so she didn't, she just felt most of the time like a regular kid for the first few years of her life. And she did, when she was 2 years old, she ended up having a Chiari malformation, which is at the back of the neck here. And what the doctor had to do is, he did an operation. He had to take out a few of her neck bones. And I can't remember exactly what he did with that Chiari, but this was right around Christmas time, and it was a very, very hard surgery. And while we were there, one of the nurses had her in a little buggy that she was pushing her around in, a little wagon. And when she went to put her back in the bed, she dropped her. And my mom, she was just in such a state because that nurse had dropped Mandy. But praise God, it didn't do anything bad to her and all that. So Mandy has had, I went back and looked, in her short life, when she passed away, she was 27 years old. She had 46 surgeries. Some of those were very minor. Some were very major. That surgery for the Chiari decompression was a major surgery. She also, at one point when she was younger, she had to have a revision of her shunt. And when that was done, the next day, they checked to see how it was working, and the neurosurgeon admitted that he had put it in the wrong place, and he had to go in and redo it, have the whole surgery all over again. For the most part, in her early years, it didn't bother her too much. She ended up having pain at the very top of where her what's it called, the shunt was.
Yeah.
And she started at a preschool when she was 3-year-old at the developmental preschool, and she loved going there. At that time, she wasn't even having physical therapy anymore. She was walking, and she didn't have physical therapy, so they decided to just, she wasn't getting any kind of therapy, but she became a role model for the other kids. And she was very spunky, and she loved to sing. Whenever they would have a graduation in June for those little kids that were graduating from the developmental preschool, she would sing, I think it was God Bless America,
Yeah.
or one time she sang What a Wonderful World. That was one of her favorite songs. And so then when she went into kindergarten, that's when I started teaching at Big Ridge. And I was team teaching. And she was in my kindergarten class, which was kind of a weird thing to have happen. But she did very well in school. Sometimes she would have troubles. One of the troubles that kids with spina bifida have is in keeping their things organized, or maybe even finishing a task. Like if she would have a worksheet, sometimes she wouldn't even, she'd forget to do the other side. And but for the most part, she was very smart. She was an early reader, and she loved to read. When she, let's see here, she had, in 5th grade, she started kind of walking into walls a little bit. She wasn't real steady. And we found out that her spinal cord was tethered. It needed to be detethered. This was a very big surgery. At that time, we were seeing a neurosurgeon in Chattanooga. And we took her down there, and they did the detethering. And she was there for about a week. It was a very, like I said, a very hard surgery, and I was very worried about her. I've been a Christian for a very long time. And when I would get to where I'd be crying or worried, I would start singing the song, Praise Him in the Storm. And that's kind of been like always my theme song about Mandy when she'd be in the hospital. We always praised Him through the storm. And she came through that, we thought, okay. But what happened was we went to a wedding and she fell. And when we took her back, we found out that the patch that had been put on her back had disintegrated, and the doctor had to put another patch on there. Well, what happened after that was she was confined to a wheelchair. And she had, up to this time, like I said, she was in 5th grade, and up till this time, she'd always walked. She always, of course, prayed and hoped that she would be someday able to walk without the braces, but they weren't a huge deal. Once she got into the wheelchair, she pretty much started to go into a deep depression because she couldn't do things like she used to. And when she went into middle school, she was able to go maybe 2 years of the 3 years there. She had some problems and had to have a teacher come to the home. She was homebound for part of the time. And but her favorite year there was in 8th grade. She loved Mr. Malone, and she loved Miss Dean. Miss Dean encouraged her with her reading, and Mandy was also a very good writer. She loved to write too. And she loved history, and Mr. Malone made it come alive. And when they went on the Washington trip, we decided to keep her home, though, because we knew that she wouldn't be able to do the Washington, D.C. trip because it's a pretty intense trip. So that summer, we went to Washington, D.C. on our own and just did it at Mandy's pace, and we had a wonderful time there. Her favorite thing there was the Crime and Punishment Museum. And so then, and one of the things that just came up as a memory today was one of the things that she was able to do and liked to do was to go to the dances at the school. And she had some friends in the middle school, and the kids were mostly kind to her, I believe, at the middle school. And my son Danny at that time was playing in the band, so we would go to the football games and drop off Mandy, then come back and get her and pick up Danny, and it was a really fun time in her life. When she went to high school, she started having problems again. She had rods put in her back, and those rods lots of times hurt her. Because she did end up with scoliosis, and they were supposed to help her scoliosis. She ended up only being able to go partly through freshman year, and the rest of the time she was homebound. In August of 2015, we took her to Shriners to get the rods out. She'd been having some pain, and when we took her to her current at the her doctor that she had at the time did x-rays and said that he couldn't see anything wrong with the rods. But when we took her to Shriners, there was it was broken at the top. So he removed the rods and put other rods in, and then he just put it part of the way, and then he extended them. Well, one of the things that they do up there at Shriners is, and I don't know, they may still be doing it, they would put a halo on the children's head. And that was supposed to help with their scoliosis. And it did help, it does help many kids. It just was not the right thing for Mandy. I became dear friends with one of the people there, with one of our friends, Melissa. Her son greatly benefited from it and is leading a really wonderful life because it helped him. But with Mandy, she should have been seen by a neurosurgeon while she was there, and she was never seen by a neurosurgeon. With this halo, at one point, one of the physical therapists was adjusting the halo, and when she did, I noticed later that it looked like the top of the shunt had gone from the top of her head down toward her neck. And we didn't have it looked into at the time. She had a fusion done. She was there from August, came home in October after the fusion, or the rods. And from 2015 to 2016, she really was vomiting a lot, and we didn't know why. And I would take her to the hospital, and they would do shunt x-rays, and they would do CT scans. Nothing showed that there was anything going on with the shunt. And so I would take her in, and I'd say, well, she must have, I'd take her to the emergency room. I'd say she must have a stomach virus, something. She's throwing up again. This happened for close to a year. And in October of 2016, a year after she had this done at Shriners, I took her in, and that night they were going to have some doctors, try to figure out what was going on with her. That night she became unresponsive. The neurosurgeon had one of the people there in their office come and do a tap on Mandy's shunt, and nothing came out. They realized they were going to have to do emergency surgery on Mandy. So they did the emergency surgery on Mandy. They had to put a whole new shunt in. Something was wrapped around the shunt. And I believe myself it was from where that halo had been pushed down on her head. And so at the time, my dad helped me stay at the hospital. We would take turns staying with Mandy because it can be really hard on a person staying there every single day. And I was there with her the night she had the surgery. So the next night, my dad was with her. And he called Tom and me, and he said, you need to get down here right away. something's going on, and they've got me out in the emergency room, and it looks like it might be something with her heart. So we went down there, and her heart had stopped for, I think it was at least half an hour. And when we finally were able to go in, she was in an induced coma, and she had a ventilator. And my mom had just passed away just a couple months prior to that from the same thing. She was in an induced coma and on a ventilator. So my dad and I broke down crying because we had just gone through this with my mom in August, and here was Mandy. And so she ended up, they moved her into another room in the PICU, and she ended up being on that ventilator for, it was until December, almost Christmas. This was the end of October. And she was kind of out of it quite a bit for quite some time. This was the first year that we were having the election that Trump was running in, and she was such a big Trump fan. And we went ahead and let her she was able to do a mail-in. And so whenever she would sometimes come out of this coma-like state, we would tell her, Trump won, and she was so happy. And then the next time it would happen again, she didn't remember, so we'd have to tell her again. Well, it looked like she was going to have to come home with the ventilator. And what they had to do was put a trach. They had to put a trach in her throat. She came home just maybe a day before Christmas Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the next day she had to go back?
What year was this?
This was 2016, the first time she got it. The ventilator, what happened was the ventilator that they sent us home with was not working properly. And she couldn't breathe. And I dialed 911, and they had to take her in the ambulance down the road to the church down the road, and they brought the life flight out and took her to Children's. And she had to get another ventilator. But she was able to come home on Christmas Eve. She was only there a couple days, but it was a very scary thing for her. She, I think, ended up with PTSD after that from being in a helicopter. She ended up, it was really hard taking care of her with the ventilator. I would, at the time, my dad was still here, and this is his house, and I would stay in the room with Mandy and take care of her. And then Dad would let me sleep in a couple of hours because that machine went off, on and off all night, just about. And she ended up being able to get off that ventilator. I think it was maybe like April or May. She was able to get off of it and breathe on her own. So we were just so relieved about that. And of course, the whole grew back pretty quickly. The next thing that ended up happening to her was 2 years later. Really, if anything strange was going to happen to Mandy, it would happen. In 2018, this was once again around October. October is when she was born, and it just wasn't a very good month for her lots of times. She started losing movement in her hands. And this was going on for a few days, and then she just could not move her hands. And I was reading about it on the internet, of course, and I started thinking, this sounds kind of like Guillain-Barré. And whenever I took her to the hospital, she ended up back in PICU again. They had a disease specialist look into it. They were doing all kinds of blood tests. And they did finally say that this was a Guillain-Barré type disease. And what happened before she went up to PICU, the Guillain-Barré attacked her lungs. She once again was on a ventilator. And by this time, We just, the nurses there, of course, as everybody knows, is so wonderful. They're very wonderful in PICU. And they just loved Mandy. And they be just, by this time, were like part of our family. And they took the utmost care of Mandy. Um, Her birthday is October 23rd. They celebrated her birthday in there. While she was sleeping, they decorated her room. They brought in a sombrero for her to wear, and it was just such a good time for Mandy. And then at Halloween, she had a costume that she had wanted to wear that was here at home, and it was a Sally. What's her name from?
Nightmare on Elm Street.
No, Nightmare.
Sorry.
Nightmare.
Nightmare Christmas.
The Night Before Christmas.
Night Before Christmas.
And it was Sally. Sally, redheaded Sally. She had a red wig, and so they dressed her up. They put her costume on her. They put her red wig on her, and she celebrated her Halloween there. It was it's just hard to believe that people would take such wonderful care, that would love your child so much, just almost as much as you love them. And so let's see, I'm trying to think. She ended up coming home again on a ventilator. And my dad, once again, helped me take care of her, going to the switching off days with me. And she came home in that ventilator, and once again, she was able to get off of it again. But the second time around, I think it really affected her lungs even worse. And she ended up having to be on oxygen for most of the time, just with a cannula, though. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that Mandy had a fun life as much as possible. And so one of the things that she loved to do, she loved country music. She absolutely loved, she just fell in love with, Scotty McCreery whenever he was on American Idol. We became part of his fan club. And anytime we could, we went to one of his concerts. We went to, I think, 2 of his concerts at Harrah's and Cherokee. Every summer we would go to his fan club meeting and concert that he had during the big time that they have in Nashville in June when all the stars are there. She would always get to get her picture taken with him, and he always remembered her every year, and it was just one of the highlights. And then another concert that we went to, which was a really big deal for Mandy, she got to see Willie Nelson, and that was just a few years ago. We went to see Willie Nelson. Mandy, I just wish everybody could have seen the happiness on her face whenever we got to see Willie Nelson. It was something else. And then let's see here. She also saw Randy Travis. Now, of course, bless his heart, Randy Travis wasn't able to sing. They had another guy singing for him, but we were right up in the front row, and she could see Randy Travis there. In the last year, in 2020, of course, was a bad year for COVID. And we made sure, all of us, that we wore the mask, that we did everything we were supposed to do, because we could not chance Mandy getting COVID. And despite the things that we did, I ended up getting COVID. Well, Danny, my son, got it, and Tom had a very mild case. He didn't have hardly any symptoms. I had it the worst and ended up in the hospital with pneumonia. And I stayed away from Mandy until, and this was November 30th of 2020. I stayed away from Mandy until just almost Christmas Eve. And pretty much got over that. And so she wasn't ever exposed to it. And then The next year, it was exactly, let's see here, my dad in September of 2021, he and Mandy both got the COVID vaccine. Whenever I got COVID, they didn't have the vaccine yet. And he really didn't believe in the COVID vaccine, but he got it just to protect Mandy. And he got it in September. Well,
He had both doses. It
yes,
was
he
the
had,
second dose.
it was a second dose that he had. And my dad was 81 years old, but he was a very healthy 81. He mowed every single yard on the property. My brother's dog had passed away, and he went up there and dug a big hole to bury this dog. And he was very healthy till he had the second shot. And my dad became like a different man. He ended up getting liver failure. And it was determined at the hospital that it was because of the COVID vaccine. However, it was supposed to be reported, and it was never reported to CDC. It was never reported to Pfizer, and it was kind of covered up by the hospital. I won't say the hospital's name, but anyway. My dad passed away shortly after he went to the hospital. He was able to come home, and he came home, and my prayer for my dad was always that he would just die in his sleep peacefully. And he and my mom were both Christians. They brought me up to be a Christian. And he was on hospice when we brought him home. And this was on a Sunday evening. And the next day, hospice sent out a chaplain to come talk to me and Mandy. And we talked, and the chaplain talked to Mandy about all these things she'd been through. And he prayed with us, and I told him one of the things we're praying for is that my dad will go in his sleep. So we prayed for that. And the chaplain was there probably around 12:30 in the afternoon. And it was just a couple hours later when I checked on my dad that I realized he passed away. He passed away in his sleep. And I praise God for that. And it had been 5 years since my mom died. He missed my mom so much. And I knew that they were reunited. And the thing is, my dad and Mandy were so close. And it was so hard on Mandy. She went into a deep depression. And like I said, it was so hard on her. And it fell to me to take care of her like my dad did, because my dad had taken care of her for me while I was teaching and until I had to give up teaching. And my son helped me a lot too, because my husband was working. My son helped me take her to the doctor visits and lift her for me and with different things like that. And Mandy, she had some bouts where her lungs were not doing real well. She'd have troubles breathing. And the last time that I had taken her to the hospital, it was before Christmas last year. And she had pneumonia then. And she wanted to go to Fort Sanders because that's where her wound care doctor was. And at this time, she had a very large wound on her back, which gave her a lot of pain. Some people knew and some people didn't. Mandy was in horrible, horrible pain.
It was the bed sore. That's what the wound was, yeah.
Yeah. And it was usually her back and the bed sores. They gave her so much pain. And she had troubles with kidney stones too. And one of her kidney stone operations, they had attached something for her urine to flow into, attached to her. And it caused her to have to move her back in such a way that that's how she got the bed sore on her back. And so she was in the hospital, but she was able to come home. And this was, I can't remember exactly the month that was, but at Christmas time this past year, um, let's see, wait for the card pass here. At Christmas time, we had some sickness in the family, so we didn't go to our families get together up the hill here for Christmas Eve. And so the next week, Mandy is so very close with her nieces. And she got to see her two nieces. What we did was what Mandy wanted to do for Christmas, because Christmas was over then. She wanted to take the girls to, she'd always wanted to take them to Build-A-Bear. And she was going to get them both, let them have a Build-A-Bear. And they'd never been to Build-A-Bear. One of the nieces at this time in December, one of them was 3 and one of them was 6. And so we went with Sarah, my niece, they're my great nieces, and we took them there, and they both got a Build-A-Bear and had such wonderful time with Mandy. And then then we went out to eat, and Mandy had decided she wanted this to be something that we do every Christmas with the girls, and so this was, like I said, just right after Christmas, and little did we know when we had that time with the girls that the next week that Mandy would be gone. She still had so many times the troubles with her breathing, and that pressure sore in her back just was not healing. And I believe that it had something to do maybe with her lungs. I just don't know. But Mandy had me at one time, maybe a year ago prior to this. She wanted to go to the lawyer and have paperwork drawn up that she did not want to be resuscitated or anything like that. She never ever wanted to go on a ventilator again. And we knew that if she had to go on a ventilator, she would probably never get off of it this time if she went again. And what happened was she stopped. She was supposed to get a brand new bed that day for her pressure sore that would have air flowing through it, and then we were going to put it right in front of the TV. And so somebody, I think Tom, had picked her up and put her in the chair, this other chair, while we were moving things around. And I happened to look over and notice, like maybe, I don't know if it was 30 minutes later or what, and she looked like she was just out of it. And then I noticed that she wasn't breathing. She had her oxygen on. And we dialed 911 and we tried to do CPR on her. And they came and got her, and we took her to, they took her to the closest hospital, which was in Tazewell. And she was unresponsive, but she was still alive. And I had the paperwork with me, and I told them, that she didn't want to have she didn't want to be resuscitated. She didn't want to have anything done. And she was really kind of, at that time, unaware of what was going on. There was a short period of time where she did kind of come to and talk to me a little bit. She drank a little bit. And I was thinking, wow, but then she went back out again. And so we had to wait through that night, and the next day, they finally got an ambulance to come that would bring her home. And hospice was going to come here. And so the Granger County ambulance came and brought her home. And I put her in my bed, and she never did regain consciousness. She never suffered. They had her on oxygen, which in some ways I wish they wouldn't have, because I didn't know exactly when she passed because of the sound of the air going in, the oxygen. But I knew when she passed, and it was both very hard, but at the same time, a relief. Because I knew where she went. I knew she was a strong Christian, and she knew that she'd be with her Papa again, and she'd be with her Savior. And she also had a dear friend of hers, her best friend, was also in heaven waiting for her, Sierra Hiding, and just family members. She would finally get to meet Loretta Lynn. And
Elvis.
and Elvis too, which my mom and dad also. But mainly she'd get to be with her Savior. And for me, I miss Mandy, and there's not really a whole lot of times that I cry. And I think it's because I cried so much when she was alive because of all she went through. And so I think it's different when a child dies that has suffered so much, and you know where they're going, and you know she's out of pain, and she can run again. On her tombstone, we put "Running with Jesus" at the bottom. And I know she's happy, and she's free. And what she would want everyone to know, because she posted a lot on Facebook, and she would post to people about them needing to know our Savior. And so that's what she would leave behind. She would want everyone to have a relationship with Jesus, so they'll go to heaven whenever it's their time. And I thank God that He chose me to be her mama. It's kind of strange because from a lot of people that I know that have kids with spina bifida, the majority are Christians. And I think that God just places those kids with us because He knows what they need, and that we're going to entrust His care to them. And, well, speaking of that, my mother was an artist. She was a wonderful artist. And our favorite, I'll just go and say one of our very favorite doctors, Dr. Preston Smith, was Mandy's urologist. And he had to do many surgeries on Mandy. Sometimes they were just kidney stone blastings, but he had to do a lot of surgeries. And she had this kind of like a vision for a painting. It was based on all the times that Mandy had surgeries, and we prayed, and lots of times we'd have a pastor with us. Sometimes we didn't. And we always just put it in Jesus' hands. It's a painting that my mom did. And you can see that she's picturing Jesus with his hand on the surgeons. And he did have his hand on the surgeons every time. Even if things maybe didn't turn out like we liked, we know that God has a reason for everything. And we just leave her in Jesus' hands. And that's what we did during her whole precious life. So I'm just glad that Mandy had so many good things that she could remember. Like I said, I tried my best to try to offset all the hurts and pains that she had, and it sometimes got her mind off the pain, being able to do these things. But anyway, I appreciate y'all listen to me talk about my precious Mandy, and thank you.